Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Philip Gouldig. I was born in the Ukraine, and I'm a survivor of the Holocaust.
I went last Saturday, and I didn't know the Saturday before because of raining, and I went shoulder you with Phil that in Montreal.
So good to know what I'm
I'm Jeffrey Kopstein. I'm the acting director of the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Toronto, and it's a real pleasure to be here tonight to talk about Mina's story, which is, I think, a really important document. It's a Holocaust memoir, but it's really more than that because it tells a kind of an intimate, detailed story of a young Jewish woman and her family who both suffer and, of course, are rescued. It's also at the same time an important story of Ukrainian-Jewish relations. And it's a book that doesn't really pull any punches. There are good people, there are bad people, and, of course, there's the people who save Mina and her family.
Hi, I'm Lisa Anderman. I'm Mina's granddaughter, and very excited and proud to be here to see this whole project come to fruition and to see all the people coming in to share my grandmother's story and the people around her. So it's a very exciting night for me and for my family.
And today we have a presentation of a rather interesting and important book, Mina's story, that has been published in English, and now we have a Ukrainian translation. The story deals with the Holocaust survivor, Mina, who was saved by two Ukrainian families, Kukurudza and Kravchuk, and the families were recognized by Vashem as righteous. And we feel that books like that can build bridges that we all need.
Thank you for the Ukrainian Documentation Center, Ukrainian-Jewish Encounter, the University of Toronto of Jewish Studies, and everyone involved with this project. Unfortunately, this project shouldn't have happened, but it has happened. Hopefully we can learn from history, so thank you for participating.
On behalf of the St. Vladimir Institute, the Ukrainian-Canadian Research and Documentation Center, the Ukrainian-Jewish Encounter Initiative, and the family of Mina Deutsch, I'd like to thank you all for coming to the book launch of the Ukrainian edition of Mina's story, a doctor's memoir of the Holocaust. Istoriya, Miny, Presentated про Holocaust.
Добрий вечір, шановні гості Інституту Святого Володимира. Дуже приємно вас вітати в інституті і щоб така повна аудиторія прийшла посеред тижня у вівторок. Сподіваємося, що вам не раз ще доведеться сюди приходити, тому що ми плануємо більше програм. А 2 дні тому ми мали також іншу презентацію книжки, де ми говорили про те, як на теренах України гинули люди з голоду, гинули, бо їх знищували. Сьогодні історія інша. На тих же теренах України, на тих же теренах колишньої Східної Європи гинув інший народ. І сьогодні ми будемо про це говорити.
And so what I'd like to do in a few minutes is to present a historical background, the events that are covered in Mina's story. Later, Professor Kopstein will discuss more directly the Holocaust and the events that she experienced. We are dealing with a territory that is historically called Galicia. It was the time when the old Polish-Lithuanian state, the old Polish state, was partitioned. It was partitioned by 3 powers, and one of them was the Habsburg family and Austria. And they took part of what was the old Polish state. They felt a little badly about it. Maria Theresa, the empress at that time, was said to cry as she took parts of Poland. And it was often said, the more she cried, the more she took. But in order to justify this, she said that, after all, the kings of Hungary, whom she gave the claims of, had once been the rulers of the old Ruthenian-Ukrainian Principality of Halych. From this the word Galicia came, and therefore she had a right to these territories. As you might guess, the Polish elite, the nobility, did not agree with this view. They viewed this as a great crime, the partition of Poland. And if you study 19th century history, one of the great problems is the Polish question. The Poles had been a great state, and suddenly they did not exist.
There are so many lessons for us in this small book. Lessons about survival, about cruelty, about kindness, of the millions of Jews who have died and are buried in what is today's Ukraine. And not just their deaths, but of course their lives. And of course the complex relations among the three ethnic communities that my friend and colleague Frank Sisson so I think beautifully laid out for us. That's a very difficult thing to do in 15 minutes. Three ethnic groups, the Ukrainians, the Poles, Jews in Galicia. The Poles who had a state of their own, and in fact viewed that area and viewed their state in terms of kind of ethnic ownership, and the Ukrainians and Jews who of course did not have a state of their own. Until very recently, the Holocaust was viewed as really symbolizing the dark side of modernity. It was the kind of thing that could only happen under modern conditions. It required railways, factory-like conditions where instead of goods that were produced, corpses were produced. The central image of the Holocaust was Auschwitz, was the concentration camp. We now understand, and I think recent research has really brought this home, that this is a kind of a partial picture, and in some ways a very flawed picture of the Holocaust. The Holocaust was in many ways not only a kind of industrial action, something that could only have happened in modernity, but it was also one in which the violence was not simply impersonal, it was deeply personal. It was even intimate. A great many victims had conversations with the people that eventually killed them. They knew them. They understood each other. Many had small conversations before shooting pits. And of course, before pogroms, these were their neighbors, their friends, their schoolmates. So the picture we now have of the Holocaust is a much different picture than the one we had 10 or 15 years ago. And this is due in large part to the huge outpouring of memoir literature.
The picture's worth 1,000 words, and I have the happy job of showing you some of the photos from the book and from afterwards, which we've been hearing about. First, we see a map of this area, the very complicated little corner that overlaps between Poland, Ukraine, and Romania, and that we heard Professor Sisson describe as the vortex earlier this evening. And some of the towns where the action was taking place, including Mielnica Podolska, Jeziorjane, Borszczów, and the city of Lviv, where my grandmother went to high school and got married. And tonight we're celebrating the Ukrainian version of Mina's story, but just to let you know, there's also a version in Finnish that was prepared by my brother and his wife, who is from Finland, so that people can read it in that language now. And we hope one day also to have completed a German version of the book. And none of this would have been possible without Mr. Leonid Finberg from the Judaica Institute in Kiev, who helped us greatly with the translation and publication of Mina's story in Ukrainian. Here you see the Canadian-Jewish news article from January 2010, where my mother, Eva Anderman, and Philip Goldig, her cousin, were interviewed about their participation in the Yad Vashem ceremony that honored the two families of Kravchuk and Kukurudza, who were instrumental in hiding and saving my grandparents' lives. And here you see a photo from the Yad Vashem ceremony. From left to right, you see my father, Frederick Anderman, Philip Goldig, the Israeli ambassador, Irina Sokol, who was the one of the daughters of Mr. and Mrs. Kravchuk, then my mother, Eva Anderman, next to her, the president's wife, Mrs. Yushchenko, and then in the kerchief, Yaroslava Subota, who's the other daughter of Mr. Kravchuk, and next to her is Maria Misko, who is the granddaughter of Mr. Kukurudza, who was being honored.
I was born 6 weeks after the war started on October 19th, 1939. Now you know my age. And I was asked to perhaps read a couple of excerpts from my mother's book. I hope that you'll all have a chance to read it, and for those of you who've already read it, you know that my parents went through many episodes where really our life was just hanging by a thread.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Philip Gouldig. I was born in the Ukraine, and I'm a survivor of the Holocaust. Many of you have read the book, my Aunt Mina's book, so you know that it deals with a time of tragedy, sadness, inhumanity, what man is capable of doing to his fellow human beings. But permit me to tell about a new chapter to this book, which started a few years ago and is continuing until today. It is a story of renewal, of joy and happiness. But in order to tell you about the present, we must take a moment to tell you about the past and how we got to this point.
So for me, the process of publishing the Ukrainian edition of Mina's story began 12 years ago when I met my wife, Lisa. Lisa gave me a copy of her grandmother's book shortly after we began dating. She wanted to share her family story with me and how her grandmother was the reason why her family survived the war. I read the book from cover to cover one night at home, and I was moved by Mina's memoir. It also made me reflect on my own family's history and the story of the Second World War. She was very honest in her memoir, how there were Ukrainians who helped her and her family to survive, but she also wrote about the Ukrainians who did not help. It made me ask why some Ukrainians who were being persecuted by both Hitler and Stalin could cause such harm to others.
Tonight has provided us with a greater understanding of one of the darkest periods of the 20th century. It's also allowed us to know how important it is to keep the rescuer and survivor stories alive, so that someday we can stop repeating the past. In the words of Dr. Leon Kamedis, who was a 7-year-old boy saved by Metropolitan Sheptytsky, the saving of one life is really the saving of many. And with Dr. Deutsch, the saving of her life was the saving of her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, and the future lives and the future worlds. To you, we thank you for your story.